It was 1985, and a screenplay landed on Clint Eastwood's desk. The title was The William Money Killings. Later, it would be called The Cut Whore Killings. Eventually, it would become Unforgiven. Clint read it in one sitting. When he finished, he closed the script, put it in his drawer, and didn't touch it for 10 years. Not because he didn't like it. He loved it. He called it gorgeous. He said it was the only Western screenplay he'd read since The Outlaw Josie Wales that genuinely moved him. But he had a problem. He was too young. The main character, William Money, was an aging killer haunted by his violent past, a man broken by time and conscience, a farmer who'd given up the gun, raised pigs, buried his wife, and tried to live clean. Then, desperate for money, he takes one last job, one final return to the violence that defined him. Clint was 55 years old in 1985, still in his prime, still the man with no name in audiences' minds, still Dirty Harry, still the icon who squinted and shot and always won. He wasn't old enough to play a man who'd lost everything, who was broken, who struggled to mount a horse and missed easy shots because his hands shook. So Clint made a decision that almost nobody in Hollywood would make. He waited. He put the script in a drawer and told himself he'd come back to it when he was ready, when he'd aged into the role, when he'd lived enough to understand what it meant to be past your prime but forced to do the thing you were once great at. 10 years. That's how long he waited. The script had been written by David Webb Peoples, the man who'd co-written Blade Runner. Peoples had written it in 1976. That's 16 years before the film was made. The screenplay had knocked around Hollywood for years. Francis Ford Coppola had tried to get it made and failed. Nobody wanted to finance a dark anti-Western about old men and moral rot. Then it landed with Clint. Actually, it had landed with Clint years earlier, in the early 80s, but his story editor, Sonia Chernus, the woman who'd written The Outlaw Josie Wales, read it first and sent him a scathing memo. She wrote that the script doesn't deserve my time or yours, that it was an insult to this company, and that Clint should get rid of it fast. So he almost did. He almost tossed it. But something made him read it himself. And when he did, he fell in love with it. But he still didn't make it, because he knew with absolute certainty that if he made it too soon, he'd ruin it. The role required age, real age, not makeup or acting, actual weariness, actual broken-down physicality, actual regret that comes from decades of living. So he put it in the drawer, and he waited. During those 10 years, Clint made other films. Bird, a jazz biopic, White Hunter, Black Heart, The Rookie, Pink Cadillac. Some succeeded, some didn't. His career had ups and downs. By the early 90s, he was in what some critics called a slump. He wasn't the box office draw he'd once been. Some wondered if his best days were behind him. And then, in 1991, Clint opened that drawer. He was now 61 years old. He looked at himself in the mirror and thought, I'm old enough now, but not too old. If I wait much longer, I won't be able to do the action. He pulled the script out, read it again, and this time he was William Money. The age fit, the weariness fit, the sense of a man confronting his past and realizing he can't escape what he was. That all fit.
Clint called the cast he wanted. Gene Hackman for Little Bill Daggett, the brutal sheriff who runs the town like a tyrant. Morgan Freeman for Ned Logan, Money's old partner. Richard Harris for English Bob, the gunfighter whose reputation is larger than his skill. Gene Hackman initially said no. He'd done too many violent films, he said. He didn't want to do another one. But Clint told him this wasn't a violent film. It was an anti-violence film. A film about what violence actually costs, what it does to people, how it doesn't solve anything, even when it's necessary. Hackman read the script and changed his mind. Morgan Freeman signed on immediately. He'd just been nominated for an Oscar for Driving Miss Daisy and was one of the most respected actors working. He read the script and knew it was something special. Richard Harris, the legendary Irish actor, took the role of English Bob, the character who gets humiliated and beaten by Hackman's sheriff in one of the film's most brutal sequences. Shooting began in Alberta, Canada in the summer of 1992. Clint directed and starred. He shot the film in 39 days, fast, efficient, the way he always worked. But there was something different this time, a weight to the material, a seriousness. Clint barely changed the script. David Webb Peoples had written something near perfect, and Clint knew it. He made one major change. He removed an opening voiceover and replaced it with title cards. That was it. The rest was Webb Peoples' words, exactly as written. The film's look was crucial. Cinematographer Jack Green shot it with natural light whenever possible. Dark interiors, muddy streets, rain and cold. The Old West as it actually was, ugly, hard, unforgiving. Clint knew this film was his goodbye to Westerns. He'd been making them since 1964. For nearly 30 years, he'd been the face of the genre. Leone's spaghetti westerns, his own revisionist westerns like High Plains Drifter and the outlaw Josie Wales. Westerns had made him a star, and Unforgiven was his final word on the subject. The film is dedicated to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, Clint's two greatest mentors. Leone had died in 1989, Siegel in 1991. Both had taught Clint everything about filmmaking, and Unforgiven was Clint's tribute to them, a film that took everything they'd taught him and used it to dismantle the very myths they'd helped create. The plot is simple. William Money is a washed-up killer trying to raise his two kids on a failing pig farm in Kansas. A young man called the Schofield Shid shows up and offers him money to kill two cowboys who cut up a prostitute in Big Whiskey, Wyoming. The prostitutes have pooled their money for a bounty. Money needs the cash. He's broke. His farm is failing. His kids are hungry. So he agrees. He recruits his old partner, Ned Logan, and they ride to Big Whiskey.
But they're not young anymore. Money can barely mount a horse. He misses shots he would have made easily 20 years earlier. He gets sick. He's weak. He's not the killer he used to be. And the town they're riding into is controlled by Little Bill Daggett, a sheriff who doesn't allow guns in his town and beats anyone who breaks that rule. Little Bill is brutal, methodical, and believes he's doing the right thing by keeping order through violence. The film builds slowly, quietly. It's not a traditional Western with heroic showdowns. It's about old men confronting what they've done, about the cost of killing, about how violence destroys everyone it touches, the people who commit it and the people who suffer from it. There's a scene where Money shoots a young cowboy, and the kid dies slowly, crying for water. Money and Ned watch him die. It takes forever. The kid is terrified. He doesn't want to die. And Money, who's killed dozens of men, realizes this is what it's always been. Not clean, not heroic, just ugly and sad. When the film was released in August 1992, critics immediately recognized what Clint had done. This wasn't just another Western. This was a deconstruction of the entire genre. A film that looked at the violence Clint had glorified for 30 years and said, this is what it really is. Brutal, scarring, unforgivable. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Jack Matthews of the Los Angeles Times called it the finest classical Western to come along since perhaps John Ford's The Searchers. The film opened #1 at the box office. It made $15 million its opening weekend, the biggest opening ever for a Clint Eastwood film at that time. It stayed #1 for 3 weeks. Then it played for months. It just kept making money. By the time it finished its theatrical run, it had grossed $159 million on a $14 million budget. A massive hit. But the real vindication came at the Academy Awards. Unforgiven received 9 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Director for Clint, Best Actor for Clint, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, Best Supporting Actor for Morgan Freeman, Best Screenplay for David Webb Peoples, Best Cinematography, Best Sound, Best Film Editing. And it won 4. Best Picture, Best Director for Clint, Best Supporting Actor for Hackman, and Best Film Editing. Clint Eastwood, at 62 years old, won Best Director and Best Picture, the first Oscars of his career, after 40 years in the business, after making dozens of films, after being one of the biggest stars in the world. He'd waited 30 years to make the film, and it was worth the wait. The film proved that patience, real patience, pays off. If Clint had made Unforgiven in 1985 when he first read the script, it would have been good, but it wouldn't have been what it became, because he wouldn't have had the age, the weariness, the understanding of what it means to look back at your life and see the things you've done and can't undo. At 62, Clint had that. He'd lived long enough, lost enough, understood enough. And that understanding is in every frame of the film. In the way William Money struggles to get on a horse, in the way he misses shots he used to make easily, in the way he's haunted by his past but can't escape it, in the final scene where he becomes the killer again, not because he wants to, but because that's what he is. And he's terrifying. The audience realizes this old, broken man is the most dangerous person in the room.
Gene Hackman's performance is equally crucial. Little Bill is a monster, but he's also trying to keep order. He believes he's doing the right thing. He's brutal and sadistic, but he's convinced himself he's civilized. And when Money kills him at the end, Little Bill's last words are, "I don't deserve this." And Money says, "Deserves got nothing to do with it." That line sums up the entire film. Life isn't fair. Violence doesn't discriminate. Deserve has nothing to do with who lives and who dies. The success of Unforgiven changed Clint's career. Suddenly, at 62, he was taken seriously as a director, not just a star, not just an action hero, but a real filmmaker. Someone who could make important, meaningful work. And he never made another Western. Unforgiven was his goodbye to the genre that made him. He'd said everything he had to say about it. Looking back, the story of Unforgiven is a lesson in patience and self-awareness. Clint could have made the film immediately. He had the clout, he had the resources, but he knew he wasn't ready. He knew the role required something he didn't have yet, age. So he waited 10 years, from 55 to 62. He waited until he was old enough to embody a character who'd lived too long, done too much, and couldn't escape his past. And because he waited, he made one of the greatest films ever made. A film that redefined the Western genre. A film that won Best Picture and Best Director. A film that film students still study decades later. How many people have the discipline to wait like that? To recognize that the right time isn't now, but later. To trust that the opportunity will still be there when you're ready. Most people rush. They force things before they're prepared. They take opportunities too soon because they're afraid they won't come again. Clint did the opposite. He knew the script was great. He knew he'd eventually make it. But he also knew he wasn't ready. So he put it in a drawer and waited until he was. That's wisdom. Real wisdom. The kind that comes from decades of experience and self-knowledge.
And when he finally made the film, at the perfect age, with the perfect cast, it was everything it was meant to be. Unforgiven is now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. It ranks 4th on the American Film Institute's list of best westerns, behind Shane, High Noon, and The Searchers. It's in the National Film Registry. It's studied in film schools worldwide. And it exists because Clint Eastwood had the patience to wait, to let himself age, to trust that the role would still be there when he was ready. The script was written in 1976. Clint first read it around 85. He made the film in 1992. 16 years from page to screen. But the wait was worth it, because the film isn't just great, it's perfect. It's exactly what it needed to be, because Clint waited until he was exactly who he needed to be to make it. That's the story of Unforgiven, a lesson in patience, a lesson in self-awareness, a lesson in knowing when you're ready and when you're not, and a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is wait. Put it in a drawer, let time do its work, and when you're finally ready, when you've lived enough, learned enough, aged enough, then you take it out and make it right. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that patience isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That waiting for the right moment isn't giving up, it's strategy. Have you ever waited for the perfect time to do something important? Let us know in the comments, and ring that bell for more stories about the artists who knew when to wait and when to act.